I remember the first time I saw her, the bishop's wife, walking alone through the snow, with her collar turned up against the wind and her hands empty. It was a week before Christmas, in a small city where the church bells rang every hour, but the streets still felt strangely cold. From the sky above, as I flew my quiet scouting paths, long before the sleigh is loaded, I could feel the heaviness in that place, the way one feels a storm before it breaks. There were lights in windows and wreaths on doors, but something in the air did not sing the way it should at Christmas time. I was not there in the way you see me in storybooks, of course, but I am always watching, listening, learning. This is how I know who is losing hope and who is in desperate need of a miracle that cannot be wrapped in paper. That note, my attention kept returning to the bishop's house, a grand old building attached to an even older church with stone walls and stained glass windows. The house looked warm and welcoming from the outside, yet the feeling that reached me from within was strained and weary. The bishop himself was in his study, surrounded by stacks of letters, bills, and plans for a new wing on the church. His brow was furrowed, his hands pressed against his temples as though trying to hold his worries in one place. He was a good man, kind at heart, sincere in his faith, but worn thin by the weight of expectations. Everyone looked to him for answers, for guidance, for decisions, and he had slowly begun to believe that he must carry the whole of Christmas on his shoulders alone. Downstairs, the bishop's wife moved through the house like a quiet ghost of the joy she used to be. Once, she had filled those rooms with music and laughter, with carols at the piano, and children gathered around her telling stories. But lately, she spent her evenings checking lists, arranging events, ironing robes, and trying not to show how lonely she felt, even in a house that was never truly empty. That particular night, she wrapped a scarf around her neck and stepped out into the snow to walk to the church alone. It was dark, and the wind nipped at her cheeks as she crossed the courtyard. She had left a small, folded note on the kitchen table for her husband, gone to check on the nativity scene. There was more she wanted to say, about how distant he'd become, about how tired she was of being strong and unnoticed, but the words never reached the paper. I followed her, in my own silent way, as she pushed open the heavy wooden door of the church. Inside, the air was still and cool, scented with wax and evergreen. Candles flickered along the walls, and the great stained glass windows loomed above her, dark now until morning light would set them aflame with color again. At the front of the church, the nativity scene stood waiting. The stable, the animals, Mary and Joseph, the tiny manger. One of the shepherd figures had fallen over. She knelt to pick it up and set it right. As she did, she heard her own voice echo softly in the empty space. "Look at you," she murmured to the shepherd. "You look tired too." She smiled sadly and sank onto a nearby pew. For a long time, she sat there in silence, hands clasped together, eyes on that small wooden manger. "I don't know if anyone is listening," she said at last. "I know you must be busy with more important prayers. But I am so tired of trying to be everything for everyone. I miss my husband. I miss the way we used to laugh. I miss feeling like Christmas was about joy instead of schedules and committees and complaints about the color of the candles." Her voice cracked. She pressed a hand to her lips as if to push the tears back, but they came anyway. "I don't need a miracle of money or a bigger church," she whispered. "I just want my home back. I want my husband to remember why we began this life together. I want him to see me again. Is that too small a thing to ask for Christmas?" Now, you might wonder what any of this has to do with me, with Santa Claus. After all, I am the one who brings toys, not reconciliations. But here's a secret I have learned over many, many years. Sometimes the most important gifts I deliver are not the ones that come down the chimney. Sometimes I deliver understanding, a nudge, a reminder, a gentle turning of hearts. As her words rose into the quiet church, I felt something stir at the edge of the winter sky. There is a grace that moves through the world at this time of year, a tenderness that listens closely for whispered prayers, spoken when people think no one can hear. I knew I could not simply place loving husband restored in a box beneath the tree, but I could help open his eyes. The next evening, I paid a closer visit to the bishop. The house was full of people then, parishioners bustling in and out with questions about the Christmas pageant, choir rehearsals, charity dinners. The bishop moved among them with a polite smile, nodding, answering, promising. He said all the right words, but his mind was elsewhere, tangled in worries about finances, attendance numbers, reports. Late that night, when everyone had left and the house had grown quiet, he sat alone in his study again. Papers spread before him, pen in hand. He began drafting another letter asking for donations to repair the church roof. The clock ticked on the mantel. Outside, snow drifted against the windows. It was then that a small sound caught his attention, a faint thump from the hall, followed by a soft rustle. He frowned, stood, and opened the door. On the floor just beyond the threshold lay a box wrapped in simple brown paper, tied with twine. There was no name on it, no card, no sign of who had left it. He bent to pick it up and carried it to his desk. Carefully, he untied the twine and unfolded the paper. Inside were 3 things. The first was a photograph, yellowed at the edges, himself and his wife on their wedding day, standing outside the very same church, laughing as snowflakes landed in her hair. He had his arm around her, and she looked at him as if he were the only person in the world. The second was a small wooden heart, carved by hand, smoothed by many fingers. On one side was etched a simple word, together. The third was a page torn from an old notebook, folded in half. When he opened it, he recognized the handwriting at once, his own from long ago. "My calling is not only to shepherd a church," the younger man's handwriting said, "but to love my wife as tenderly as Christ loves every soul. Never let the work of the altar replace the work of the heart." He sat very still for a long time. A log cracked softly in the fireplace. The house creaked as the temperature dropped further outside. Somewhere upstairs, his wife turned in her sleep. He did not know where the box had come from. I will not claim credit in any way he could prove, because that is not how I work. The magic of Christmas is not about being seen. It is about pointing people back to what they have forgotten. But I was there in that moment, watching as realization washed over him like the dawn over a frozen landscape. He covered his face with his hands. The bishop was not a man given to dramatic displays, but his shoulders shook once, twice. "What have I done?" he whispered into the quiet. "I've let the weight of the world pull me away from the very person who has carried it with me." He rose then, not to return to his paperwork, but to climb the stairs softly, each step measured. He paused at their bedroom door, hand on the knob, and for a moment he almost turned back. Years of habit insisted that there was still more work to do downstairs, but the memory of that photograph, that carved heart, that youthful vow held him there. He opened the door. His wife lay sleeping with an expression of weariness on her face even in rest, as if she had forgotten how to let go completely. He stood watching her for a long moment, feeling the ache of all the evenings he had hurried past her, all the small conversations he had postponed, all the laughter he had allowed to fade from their home. Gently, he sat on the edge of the bed and reached for her hand. She stirred, blinking awake. "Is something wrong?" she asked, startled by the late-hour visit. "Yes," he said, his voice thick, "and I think it's my fault." She sat up slowly, concern softening her features. He took a deep breath, and at last the words he had held back for too long began to pour out. He spoke of his fears, of feeling inadequate, of trying to prove his worth through endless work. He admitted how far he had drifted from the simple joy that had drawn them together, from the warmth that had once filled their home. "I've been so busy trying to hold up the church," he said, "that I let our marriage grow lonely. I forgot that we're supposed to carry this together. I forgot you." She listened, and as she listened, tears ran silently down her cheeks, not from anger, but from relief. For all this time, she had feared that he no longer saw her, no longer needed her. To hear him confess his weakness, to hear him say, "I forgot you," was painful and healing all at once. "I have been lonely," she said quietly, "and I have been angry, but I never stopped loving you. I just didn't know how to reach you through all the noise." They sat together then, hands clasped, speaking softly into the night. It was not a quick fix, not a fairy tale spell that made everything perfect at once. Real love rarely works that way. Instead, they began to trace their way back to small gestures, shared moments, honest conversations. Back to the simple promise they had once made to each other, to walk through every season side by side. Over the next few days, changes began to appear in their home and in the church. The bishop canceled a meeting to take an evening walk with his wife beneath the Christmas lights. He asked her to help choose the hymns for the service, not as a task, but as a joy to share. He listened more and hurried less. He began to delegate some responsibilities, trusting that he did not have to bear everything alone. People noticed. Though they could not quite name what was different, the church felt warmer. The bishop's sermons grew gentler, more honest, less concerned with perfection, and more with compassion. His wife's laughter found its way back into the hallways, and music once again floated from their piano in the evenings. When Christmas Eve arrived, and I flew over that city with my sleigh finally full, I saw the church overflowing with light. Candles glowed in every window. Families huddled in pews, shoulders touching. The bishop stood at the front, his wife beside him. He looked out at the congregation, and then, for just a moment, looked at her. The gratitude in his gaze shone brighter than any star. As the choir began to sing, she squeezed his hand. He squeezed back. In that simple gesture, I saw a miracle as powerful as any I have witnessed. A heart turned back toward home. A love renewed, not by grand spectacle, but by humility, honesty, and a willingness to begin again. So when you hear the title, The Bishop's Wife, you might imagine grand callers, solemn ceremonies, and formal dinners. I think instead of a woman who dared to whisper her loneliness into the quiet of an empty church, and of a man who allowed himself to be humbled enough to hear it. I think of two people choosing, in the coldest season, to kindle their love again. And perhaps, as you listen to this story, you feel a tug in your own heart. Perhaps you have someone you have taken for granted. Perhaps you have buried your tenderness under layers of responsibility, fear, or pride. Remember this, Christmas is not only about receiving gifts, it's about returning to the people who matter, returning to the promises you made, returning to the softer, truer part of yourself. If you are the one feeling lonely, unseen, or unheard, know that your quiet prayers are not lost in the wind. They rise, just as hers did, and they are met with more love than you can imagine. And if you are the one who has drifted away, there is always a path back, lit by small, brave apologies and simple acts of kindness. As I continue my journey across the winter skies, I carry their story with me as a reminder that the greatest miracles of Christmas often happen in ordinary houses, between ordinary people, when they choose to love each other a little more honestly. May you find the courage to speak your heart gently, the humility to listen deeply, and the grace to begin again where needed. Merry Christmas from my heart to yours.